Via the stop of 1944, after a series of army defeats on both fronts, the Third Reich located itself on the protecting, both inside the East and in the West. Confronted with this case, Adolf Hitler concluded that it became necessary to exchange method and pass on the offensive in an attempt to adjust the path of the war. The top precedents turned into really the front for the reason that alliance among the Western powers and the Soviet Union become unexpectedly weakening. A rupture in this coalition ought to trade the course of occasions, and the location chosen for this assault changed into an area positioned among Belgium and Luxembourg called the Ardennes. Hitler's plan for the Ardennes became extremely bold. The strategy consisted of mobilizing an impressive army made up of around 45 divisions placed in the back of the Siegfried Line, which included the German border, and launching them towards the Yankee traces along the direction of the Inspiration River, with the aim of attaining the port of Antwerp. If the primary U.S. Army have been defeated or forced to retreat, the following step could be to isolate the British Second Military inside the north in the border area with the Netherlands, trapping them in a pocket from which they could most effectively escape through taking flight in the direction of the ocean, just as had took place for the duration of the invasion of France in 1940. If the offensive succeeded, it changed into belief that Germany could gain the vital time to produce its so-known as mystery guns, which can lead to final victory. More importantly, it changed into anticipated that the Allies' defeat within the Ardennes could force them to rethink their alliance with the Soviet Union, as a crumble in this location could imply that the Crimson Navy may want to improve into Western Europe, something neither London nor Washington was inclined to permit. Almost none of the German Navy generals considered an offensive in the Ardennes possible, recognizing that it became a disproportionate concept pushed by means of Hitler's fantasies, who were at the pinnacle of the Third Reich for years and showed clean symptoms of moral exhaustion. Fearing that his officers might overtly oppose the project, Hitler devised a foxy plan to make certain their compliance. On the night of December 11th, he summoned the excessive command to a mystery meeting in a remote place close to Frankfurt. Upon arrival, the generals have been stunned to be searched and stripped of their guns by means of SS men, who then loaded them onto a bus with protected home windows. The car took numerous turns to disorient them before quickly bringing them to Zenberg Fort, wherein they have been led to a basement, and not using a know-how of what become going on. As soon as inside the basement, the generals had been pressured to take a seat in chairs at the same time as an SS guard watched over them along with his pistol at the prepared. At that moment, a door opened and Hitler entered smiling with a confident mindset. He commenced explaining his offensive plan for the Ardennes with outstanding enthusiasm, praising the brilliance of his personal approach. The generals, humiliated and terrified via the scenario, had no choice however to nod and take delivery of his phrases, knowing that their survival depended on it. They couldn't threat opposing the Führer. At the stop of his speech, Hitler demanded that the generals sign a file confirming their assist and participation inside the offensive he become preparing. It turned into, on this unusual and coercive manner, that the planning of what would emerge as Germany's closing most important offensive of worldwide conflict II was performed. An offensive that many knew changed into nearly not possible, however which they had been pressured to aid due to pressure and worry. To perform the bold offensive on the Western Front, the German excessive command needed to face a large logistical venture. The selection to concentrate forces within the Ardennes required diverting troops and assets from the Japanese the front, which intended retreating complete divisions. In early December 1944, lots of squaddies and army system began transferring closer to the German-Belgian border, with an excellent deployment of more than 10,000 railway wagons used to move troops and fabric. The movement turned into conducted underneath strict secrecy, with severe security measures, consisting of the usage of messengers to keep away from message interception, and the midnight shipping of tanks to stay away from aerial reconnaissance. Even patrol flights were suspended, permitting the Allies to remain blind to the awareness of German forces. In technological phrases, the Wehrmacht changed into higher ready than at some other point in the battle just before the Ardennes offensive. Germany had a well-provided military of men, armored vehicles, and aircraft, giving them a great advantage. The armored units, which include the 9OF-3 F-374 C-58 E-8 C-9 DCDD, 1 EBF 10256 Fa-5 Stuguji, Panzer III, Panzer IV, and Jagd Panzer, had been reinforced with the bold Tiger, Panther, and the scary King Tiger tanks. Taken into consideration a number of the maximum powerful battle machines of the conflict, Hitler entrusted the principal effort of the offensive to his elite Waffen-SS formations. The 6th SS Panzer Military, underneath the command of Ostgruppenführer Josef Septri, became assigned to steer the attack in the northern zone, the maximum critical tasked with breaking through to Antwerp. This SS armored army protected SS Panzer and concentrated a number of the Reich's maximum skilled and fanatical devices. Within the 1st SS Panzer Corps, led through Gruppenführer Hermann Priest, were the veteran 1st SS Panzer Division Liebstand Arthur Adolf Hitler, and the 12th SS Panzer Department Hitler Jugend, supported by way of the 1-3 Parachute Division of the Luftwaffe the 12th Volk Grenadier Department, and the Special Panzer Brigade 150. Along them, the 2nd 1 SS Panzer Corps blanketed the 2nd SS Panzer Division Dassar and the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen among other supporting Grenadier and Volk Grenadier gadgets. In general, 4 SS Panzer Divisions participated within the conflict, forming the center armored spearhead of the German offensive. These SS divisions rebuilt and reorganized after the preventing in Normandy, and the Netherlands months in advance were redeployed from different theaters for this decisive assault, evidence of Hitler's heavy reliance on his most dependable troops. The Luftwaffe also performed a key position with plane inclusive of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the primary operational jet fighter, in addition to the well-famous Bf-109 and Fw-190, alongside the Junkers J-88 and Heinkel 11 bombers and the terrifying Stukas, which remained effective in bombing missions. Similarly to its spectacular air and ground power, the Germans placed heavy artillery in the Ardennes Hills, which include 88 flak cannons and Neveleberer rocket launchers able to causing huge devastation. Artillery turned into additionally deployed through Leopold armored trains which carried vast long-range guns. But what absolutely made the distinction in phrases of firepower were the V-1 and V-2 missiles, which had hidden launch ramps in the forests and represented a severe strategic danger. Furthermore, innovations along with the STG-44 attack rifle, which would move directly to revolutionize modern-day war, and the first nighttime vision goggles gave German troops a good greater benefit throughout nighttime operations. Hence, whilst the Allies underestimated the scope of the offensive within the Ardennes, the Wehrmacht changed into preparing to release one of the boldest attacks of the conflict, counting on an arsenal of recent technology and advanced conflict processes. The plan became to interrupt through Allied traces, seize key ports, and exchange the path of the conflict on the front, all beneath a veil of secrecy that held until the very second of the attack. Operation Vac Amrin, also referred to as the Conflict of the Bulge, was Germany's ultimate foremost try and shift the tide of warfare in the West. At the beginning scheduled for December 10, 1944, the operation was behind schedule till the 16th of that month due to bad climate situations that were anticipated to prevent Allied air operations. Subject Marshal Jur von Rundert, who had performed a key function inside the German victory in France in 1940, changed into appointed as the primary commander of the offensive. In spite of his revel in, Rundstedt remained skeptical due to the shortage of gas, because the reserves promised by Hitler had been a long way more than what may want to clearly be amassed, forcing German forces to rely on captured enemy elements. The German attack plan concerned a fast blitzkrieg-fashion offensive launched in three fundamental columns. The first, led via General Hasso von Manteuffel, targeted the significant Ardennes, with the 5th Panzer Military dividing its power into multiple armored and infantry gadgets. The second, one column under General Josef Sepp Dietrich, would improve toward the Liege location, also using numerous armored and infantry divisions, aiming to interrupt quick through the Allied traces. In the end, the third column, commanded by using well-known Erich Brandenberger, would take the southern flank, advancing from Luxembourg and shifting towards the Allied positions. The German offensive turned into carefully prepared with an army composed of 200,000 squaddies, 2,000 tanks, 1,900 artillery portions, and 3,000 aircraft. But no matter the significance of the operation, the lack of elements and the robust Allied counterattack hampered the improvement of German forces. The bad weather to start with worked in Hitler's desire, permitting the offensive to take the Allies with the aid of surprise. However, the shortage of fuel and the difficulty in maintaining the momentum of the assault sooner or later prompted the German forces to stall and retreat, marking the ultimate failure of the offensive. In spite of its ambition, the offensive did now not acquire its strategic goals. Allied resistance, in particular that of Yankee forces, together with the rapid arrival of reinforcements, halted the German advance, marking the start of the stop of the conflict on the Western Front. The operation, although initially a success in terms of penetration, ended up being a total failure, laborious the final reserves of the Wehrmacht and irreparably weakening Germany's ability to face up to the Allied enhance. The Ardennes, a mountainous location spanning components of Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, was a hard terrain characterized by dense plants, steep hills, darkish forests, deep valleys, and numerous streams, all protected in thick layers of snow for the duration of wintry weather. In this region, the USA military changed into scattered, weakened, and demoralized after suffering excessive defeats in operations along with Market Garden inside the Netherlands and the War of Achken Forest. Furthermore, the Allies have been in a precarious logistical situation as supplies needed to travel long distances from the seashores of Normandy throughout all of France and Belgium, making resupply extremely complex. Due to the disasters suffered at Herken Forest, where German forces inflicted heavy losses on the US Army, the Allies determined themselves with limited sources to carry out any offensive moves. In response, excellent Allied commander Dwight D. Eisenhower convened assembly on December 7, 1944 in Maastricht. The conference covered British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, and American Preferred Omar Nelson Bradley. The goal of the meeting became to talk about the opportunity of a quick counter-offensive in opposition to the 0.33 Reich so as to reveal the public that the Allies nevertheless had the potential to take the initiative, particularly after the defeats of autumn 1944. But the offensive to start with planned for January 1945 in no way came about. Sarcastically, in place of being the attackers, the Allies became the ones beneath assault. Within the weeks that accompanied, German forces beneath Hitler's management released a wonder offensive inside the Ardennes, a maneuver that absolutely caught the Allied forces off shield. This German assault could regulate the route of events on the Western Front, trying out the Allies' capacity to respond to one of these formidable and nicely coordinated strikes. Within the Ardennes, U.S. forces had been in an inclined shielding role. Their deployment consisted of an irregular network of fortified outposts and ditches, some very near German lines, growing the risk of encirclement and shortages of materials like ammunition and fuel. Similarly, tanks had been scattered in small units, making them less powerful in opposition to German armor, which included superior fashions along with the Tiger and Panther. Although the Allies had air superiority, their generation was nevertheless inferior as they lacked jet plane and fighters just like the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt needed to perform without OK protection. The deployment of Allied forces within the Ardennes was more often than not under America First Army commanded via fashionable Courtney Hodges with several infantry and armored divisions. Popular George Patton, answerable for the US 3rd Military, additionally played a critical role inside the protection, mobilizing more than one infantry and armored divisions. Similarly, the British Corps was involved with infantry and paratrooper devices, even though their presence changed into greater restrained in comparison to that of the Americans. In overall, the Allies concentrated 83,000 infantrymen, 242 tanks, 394 artillery portions, and 1,000 aircraft within the Ardennes zone. No matter these sources, Allied forces were quick overwhelmed by way of the German offensive, dealing with extreme situations inclusive of bloodless climate and inadequate equipment. Morale became low due to the proximity of the Christmas holidays, further affecting the infantrymen readiness. The excessive cold brought on severe cases of frostbite even before the warfare commenced, leaving the Allies even extra weakened on this inhospitable terrain. December 16th, the final blow inside the Ardennes. Within the early morning hours of December 16, 1944, German forces unleashed a ferocious bombardment over the Ardennes with more than 1,500 artillery portions, firing shells across a 141 km front spanning the borders of Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium. This assault became observed through the launch of V-1, V-2, and Rheinbote missiles which struck the cities of Liège and Antwerp, inflicting chaos and terror among the civilian population. The USV Middle stationed at the forefront found itself stuck on this devastating attack without a chance of repelling the attack. Trapped under a hail of shrapnel, the squaddies took cowl as satisfactory they might, digging holes into the snow to protect themselves. The state of affairs became worsened with the aid of the exploding shells, splintering trees, sending lethal timber fragments in all instructions, resulting in deadly accidents for those who could not escape the bombardment. A new tactical trick introduced to the confusion. Alongside the Ilu River, the Germans used effective spotlights to illuminate the low-putting clouds, developing an artificial glow that temporarily blinded the American troops. This visual deception, lighting the sky as though it had been day, served as the signal for German forces to start their floor enhance. As German traces pushed forward, 120 Junkers Do-52 aircraft took off, loaded with paratroopers geared up to perform an airborne attack below operation. The 3rd Parachute Division, led through General August von Hyder, became the first to jump. But the operation became poorly prepared, and due to navigation errors, many paratroopers were scattered at some point of close by forests. A few even touched down as a long way as the Netherlands or the outskirts of Aachen. Out of the 1,200 paratroopers dropped, most effective round 300 controlled to land close to and Malmö, developing disruptions and distractions in the American rear traces. The second wave of paratroopers under the command of Otto Skorzeny had greater achievement than the primary. The 150th Panzerunique Brigade, fashioned by way of elite commandos disguised in U.S. Army uniforms and ready with Willis jeeps, trucks, and a few captured tanks, infiltrated enemy traces undetected. These commandos wreaked havoc with the aid of creating confusion and sabotaging U.S. system. Skorzeny, with 50 men below his command that night, misled several American units through converting avenue signs and symptoms or placing crimson tape to simulate minefields. A few groups captured strategic bridges over the Meuse River, disrupting routes to Liège and Huy, causing an entire American column to take the wrong street. Using the equal foe minefield trick, another U.S. detachment turned into not able to move a tunnel near the Escaut River. Whilst close to Malmedy, commandos attacked a key crossroads, severing communications. Of the 40 jeeps that managed to penetrate the rear, best 8 were captured, and their occupants were finished for violating the Geneva Conference by wearing enemy uniforms. Though the impact of these commandos became devastating for the Allies. Their infiltration prompted absolute chaos. Roads quickly have become clogged with visitors' jams at the same time as stressed Allied troops, obsessed with shooting the meant infiltrators, arrested hundreds of harmless soldiers. Moreover, at every checkpoint, soldiers were forced to pass exams on U.S. records and current events, all while German forces endured their relentless boost. From a psychological point of view, the use of German commandos disguised as American soldiers was a master stroke. That same night, Dwight Eisenhower's headquarters in Paris received puzzling reports from the Ardennes. Scorzani's devices, by spreading the false notion that German commandos have been attempting to assassinate Eisenhower in Paris and Versailles, correctly misled the Allies. This rumor spread hastily, and as a precautionary degree, Eisenhower constrained himself to his headquarters while lots of American troops took up shielding positions in Versailles. As a result, Eisenhower becomes successfully trapped with the aid of his own men for 10 days, not able to speak nicely with the front, giving the Germans a massive strategic gain by disrupting Allied communications. Any other tactic used to distract the Allies worried the launching of V-2 missiles with the aid of German forces into rear zones in Belgium. Those missiles, because of their high altitude and pace, couldn't be detected by using Allied radar, allowing them to strike without warning. On that day, the outcomes were devastating, specifically in the city of Antwerp, where one missile hit a cinema, killing 296 American squaddies and 271 civilians interior. Earlier than sunrise on December 16, 1944, the German 5th Panzer Army made contact with U.S. positions. The development becomes so swift and sudden that many American infantrymen, unable to react in time, surrendered without firing an unmarried shot. Cities such as Marach, Hosingen, and Holzum fell speedy below the preliminary German onslaught, encountering minimal resistance, which changed into easily overcome besides at the Ilu River crossing, where the Germans confronted some light resistance that was quickly eliminated. To the north, the offensive intensified while the 6th SS Panzer Military beneath well-known Sept Dietrich released a fierce armored assault in opposition to the USA 99th Infantry Department close to Hafen. The troops of the 1st SS Panzer Department less than information Adolf Hitler Maine, the assault had been the first to clash with the people. U.S. soldiers using the duvet supplied by dense forests and hills to start with managed to withstand and retreat in an orderly style. This compelled the Germans to set up Volksgrenadier gadgets made up mostly of younger boys and older guys who, armed with the feared Panzerfaust, started to wreck U.S. positions one by one, particularly those placed in foxholes and nearby ridges. All through the day, Camp Grouper Piper, composed of 124 armored motors, and a couple of 000 guys, advanced unexpectedly to Lassem, a key crossroads. But a huge buildup of cars brought about extreme visitors' jams, stopping the tanks from continuing on the planned velocity. The site visitors' crumble changed into resulting from the overlapping movements of the 1st SS Panzer Department Lippstadt records and the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, leading the institution's commander, Joachim Piper, to make a drastic choice. Annoyed through the delay, Piper ordered his forces to ram through the vehicles of the 12th Volksgrenadier Department, irrespective of the damage brought on. The tanks pushed through the limitations, clearing a route till aware about the growing danger. Piper chose to move a German minefield to boost up the improvement. Despite the fact that several automobiles have been lost, the maneuver allowed the German army to preserve moving ahead. By way of noon, Piper's armored devices encountered the 0.33 Parachute Division, which had formerly landed in the place after leaping from plane. Fortuitously, the airborne troops have been able to board the German tanks, heading off having to hold taking walks. Upon resuming their advance, Piper's column reached the town of Buchholz, where the Yank defenders surrendered without a fight. After capturing Buchholz, Piper's institution confronted some other visitors' jam, this time caused by a line of American cars. Without hesitation, Piper ordered his guys to open fireplace, destroying all the automobiles without exception. This devastating attack worn out the enemy column and prevented the people from alerting their nearby devices, permitting the Germans to surprise the troops in Hansfeld, in which masses of prisoners surrendered over again. With unstoppable momentum, Piper persisted his improve alongside direction N-23 and captured the Bullingen airfield, wherein he took 50 extra prisoners and seized a gas depot full of fuel. Thanks to the capture of this depot, German forces have been able to refuel without issue, giving them an extensive logistical gain. This success turned into critical in allowing Piper to press forward without challenge for elements. Way to his ambitious and fast techniques, Joachim Piper solidified his reputation as one of the most outstanding and a hit panzer commanders of worldwide warfare II. Via past due afternoon, the 1st SS Panzer Corps succeeded in breaking through the defenses of the US 99th Infantry Division, overwhelming them with their armored forces. This attack created a chief breach within the front, splitting the USV Corps in and reducing off verbal exchange with other American units deployed in Europe. As night time fell, the remnants of the 99th Division attempted to regain manage via launching an offensive from their positions to halt the German strengthened near Heinerscheid. But this counterattack resulted in needless casualties and the destruction of several Sherman tanks. Following the collapse of their strains, the division began to retreat, relentlessly pursued by way of German troops who bombarded the fleeing forces with artillery, spreading chaos a few of the soldiers as they crossed snow-protected forests close to Langeheim. Past due into the night time, German forces scored a prime victory via annihilating the United States 14th Cavalry Organization. On the same time, in Shne Eifel, they eliminated all American artillery devices stationed in the area. No longer far from there, German vanguards performed every other decisive blow at Clairvaux, where the American headquarters turned into place in an antique fortress. After a severe siege, the defenders have been crushed and a Panzer tank beaten via the main gate, permitting German troops to typhoon the citadel and massacre the trapped American squaddies inner. By using midnight, the statistics achieving Allied headquarters in Paris turned into riddled with confusion, in particular after the false alarm approximately the assassination attempt on Eisenhower. The most effective showed truth turned into that the Germans had launched an attack along the front extra than 100 km wide, stretching from the Ardennes to Luxembourg. But the reality became far greater critical than to begin with said. Only in the future, the Allies had misplaced almost 3 divisions, and the German forces were advancing at a brilliant speed. The state of affairs changed into beginning to resemble the blitzkrieg tactics the Germans had hired in might also 1940. Throughout the night of December 16th to 17th, the Allies took pressing measures to try to halt the German develop in the Ardennes. After America's Fifth Army was cut off from communication, orders had been issued from Paris to send reinforcements without delay. The 106th Infantry Department changed into speedy dispatch south to Comfy the Road to St. Vaughan Infantry Division, became transferred to reinforce the flank of the already battered 99th Infantry Division. The veteran 1st Infantry Division Huge Pink 1 become additionally mobilized. Alas, the reinforcements arrived too past due as by way of dawn on December 17th. Skosny's 150th Panzer Unique Brigade had already controlled to delay the comfort devices. Left unprotected, the 99th Department turned into ambushed in Elenborn with the aid of Piper's column, suffering nearly 3,000 casualties, including the dead, wounded, and captured. That same morning, Piper ordered his column to hold toward their next goal, Louville. Upon achieving the outskirts of the village, an American Sherman tank destroyed a German Panther. But Piper, having located the enemy tank through binoculars, bravely rushed forward with a panzer to break it. However, earlier than he should act, any other German panzer fired and destroyed the Sherman with a single shot. After taking Leeville and casting off the few American tanks hiding the various timber, Piper's column superior closer to Bullingen, penetrating greater than 6 km into the American traces. Notwithstanding receiving orders not to push to some distance and to leave troops at the flanks, Piper disobeyed and pressed ahead toward the Inspiration River, annihilating scattered gadgets of America's 9th Armored Department. Via the end of December 17th, the Allies finally understood the seriousness of the scenario. Eisenhower gave the immediate order to mobilize the 82nd and 101st U.S. Airborne Divisions, and selected Patton's U.S. 3rd Armored Military to help the forces being beaten inside the Ardennes. The primary task with this maneuver was that Patton's forces have been nonetheless a ways from the front, meaning they could not arrive fast, which left the last Allied units with best one possible choice: withstand till exhaustion. Malmedy and Shinonia. Struggle crimes within the Ardennes, December 17, 1944, became a dark day for Allied forces, mainly the United States military, following the discovery of the terrible Malmedy massacre, an act of brutality completed with the aid of Waffen SS squaddies belonging to KF Grouper Piper. The tragedy came about when 84 American prisoners of warfare had been coldly done inside the small city of Malmedy, Belgium, just weeks into the German Ardennes offensive. The prisoners who were captured and have been unarmed have been shot without caution in a mass execution that left a deep effect on Allied troops. Information of the Malmedy massacre unfolded fast, and its impact changed into instantaneous. Allied media used the occasion as a symbol of the cruelty of German troops, and the story served as a grim reminder of why the Allies had been combating the 0.33 Reich. The our bodies of the victims found frozen within the snow served as further proof of the barbarity inflicted on prisoners of conflict and sparked sizable outrage within U.S. ranks. The massacre itself turned into not only a reminder of the deep-seated hatred between both sides, however also revealed the fierce nature of the struggle raging in the Ardennes. As the German enhance intensified and U.S. forces have been beaten, emotions of revenge and desperation grew swiftly among Allied infantrymen. While Malmedy became a symbol of the atrocities devoted by means of German forces, few knew at the time that this turned into now not an isolated crime. In the weeks following the tragedy, the Allies would discover that American forces additionally committed war crimes in retaliation for German atrocities. The Shannon bloodbath, any other grim episode during the warfare of the Ardennes, well-known shows an often unnoticed aspect of war crimes dedicated by means of the Allies. At the same time as the Malmedy bloodbath was widely publicized and condemned, the killing of German prisoners in Chenon remained hidden for a long term. This bloodbath, which occurred in January 1945, became a direct reprisal for the crimes devoted in Malmedy. A vast range of German prisoners had been done via U.S. soldiers in much the same way because the American prisoners had been in Malmedy. However, in contrast to Malmedy, the occasions at Chenona have been saved secret for years, in large part because of the lack of surviving witnesses and America High Instruction's refusal to analyze or well-known the incident. The Chenona bloodbath took place whilst 70 to 80 German prisoners had been coldly completed via soldiers of America 11th Armored Division near the Belgian village of Shinonia, about 75 km from Malmedy. Not like Malmedy, wherein some prisoners managed to escape and later report the massacre, there had been no survivors in Chenona. The prisoners have been coated up alongside the roadside in full view of Yank troops and gadget-gunned without mercy. The info have been so chilling that even a number of the Yankee infantrymen concerned reportedly felt deeply disturbed by using what had passed off, although few dared to speak up at the time. The context of the massacre is crucial to understanding the ecosystem of animosity and revenge that permeated the front lines on the time. The news of Malmedy had spread like wildfire, and the choice for vengeance took preserve of many U.S. squaddies who saw these German prisoners as a manner to launch their grief and rage over the loss of their comrades. At the same time as there have been no official orders to execute prisoners, the overall mindset turned into that, after what had took place at Malmi, no mercy ought to be shown to captured German infantrymen. Tales from individuals like Corporal John Fage, who was present in the course of the bloodbath, showed that there was a clean purpose to punish the Germans for prior crimes, no matter the legal or moral results. Even though the Shenonia massacre by no means acquired the identical degree of media attention as Malmi, its impact was tremendous. The duvet up of this crime, largely due to the USA Navy's refusal to analyze, left an open wound that remained buried under reliable history for decades. However, with time and through the work of historians like Anthony Beaver and Krista Bergstrom, the fact approximately Chenon commenced to surface. Those investigations uncovered the chilling info of what took place and challenged the traditional narrative of war crimes at some point of global battle II, which regularly centered completely on the atrocities committed through Axis forces. The last fort, the heroic resistance of St. Vit inside the Ardennes. The conflict for St. V started in the early hours of December 18, 1944, when the 62nd Volksgrenadier Department released a fierce assault on the town placed along the Ilu River, in which U.S. forces had been placed along the Mona-Elsenborn line. By using that factor, German troops had advanced to inside just 500 m in their goal, and after destroying 3 Sherman tanks, they controlled to take control of the hills close to Waller Road Mill. With dominance over this key function, the German forces fast beat the Yankee troops, destroying 4 more tanks and forcing them to retreat closer to the center of St. V, in which they was hoping to reorganize and face up to an extended offensive. Several kilometers far from St. Vuper Piper's column, persisted its enhance at dawn, defeating American forces in Stavelot with little resistance and razing the city absolutely. Pieper's troops then unexpectedly advanced closer to Troy Ponce, but their progress changed into briefly halted when a small organization of 13 U.S. engineers led with the aid of Sergeant Charles Hensel blew up the bridge over the Amblev River. Dealing with this impediment, Piper chose to reroute closer to Liz. However, through the afternoon, a squadron of P-51 Mustangs positioned the German column and destroyed 10 of its tanks. After this blow, behind-schedule American gadgets counterattacked in Stavelot, forcing Piper to alter his path over again. Sarcastically, simply 500 meters from Stavelot, the Germans unnoticed a gas depot containing 11 million lots of gasoline, a coins that if located may want to have provided them with enough fuel to continue their strengthen into Belgium. Due to the chance posed by Piper's proximity to America headquarters in Spar, American forces determined to, in part, evacuate further into Belgium, after learning that German armored vanguards had secured the banks of the Liane River and the village of Habien. At the night time of December 18th, America 9th Armored Division confronted off in opposition to the 2nd Panzer Division, dropping all of its tanks one after some other. This defeat opened the road to Bastonia, allowing the 5th Panzer Navy to develop at some point of the night, ultimately encountering the 101st U.S. Airborne Department. No matter the damaging conditions, the paratroopers managed to halt the German advance near Bastonia, but their bravery got here at a high cost as they lost a whole regiment inside the method. The closing castle, the heroic resistance of St. V within the Ardennes, Element 2. Within the early hours of December 19, 1944, German forces took manipulate of Schnee Eifel even as the 3 divisions that had attacked Sand annihilated 2 U.S. infantry regiments. Meanwhile, to the north, Camp Institution of Piper occupied the metropolis of Schumann, shooting 284 American prisoners and destroying numerous Sherman tanks and an Me-3 anti-aircraft gun, while the Germans lost only 3 Panther tanks inside the manor. For more than 3 days of extreme fighting, Lee and Antwerp have been bombarded through a rain of V-1 and V-2 missiles, spreading panic and chaos amongst civilians and Allied occupation forces. The Durin airfield, vital for the Allies, became additionally hit via those missiles. The launch bases and ramps, strategically placed and nicely camouflaged inside the Ardennes forests, have been tough to locate from the air, making the strikes even more effective. Those bombings brought about severe casualties, generally Belgian civilians, and severely disrupted Allied supply traces and troop actions. On December 20th, because of a critical fuel scarcity, Camp Grouper Piper became compelled to return to a complete halt, permitting the United States 82nd Airborne Division to retreat deeper into St. V together with the last armored devices. However, the Allies barely had time to regroup earlier than on December 21st. The Germans launched an attack from the northwest against SV. After defeating 3 M10 tanks, they took Breitfeld and Superior to the town's entrance, where German grenadiers armed with Panzerfaust destroyed 5 Sherman tanks. This setback compelled the Americans to reduce their defensive perimeter to a narrow strip inside the ruins of Svath. Further south in Schönberg, the 18th Ulster's Grenadier Division wiped out the ultimate remnants of America 106th Infantry Department close to Schnee Eifel Mountain. Over 10,000 American squaddies have been captured as they emerged from the forests, surrendering with hands raised. This defeat marked a vital point in the offensive, turning into one of the greatest tactical humiliations for the United States Army during the conflict. After several failed tries on December 22nd and 23rd, King Tiger and Panther tanks released a direct attack on St. Vice, wiping out the ultimate last U.S. Shermans. In the course of the assault, many American tank crews, fearing they would be burned alive by means of enemy hearth, abandoned their vehicles and joined the chickening out infantry. But some drivers chose to stand the situation bravely, launching suicidal charges. One such instance concerned 5 Shermans trying to assault a platoon of 6 Stugs on a steep hill, but the German weapons fast set them ablaze. Thanks to these success maneuvers, the morning of December 23rd introduced the collapse of the very last American resistance within the western zone of the metropolis, permitting German forces to enter St. V. This victory got here at a high value for the Allies. The United States 7th Armored Department was absolutely wiped out, and the 9th Armored Department suffered heavy losses with its few surviving participants pressured to escape in the direction of the S River, but now not before German troops seized the riverbanks. Up to that factor, the Battle of St. V had become a disaster for the US military, which suffered a devastating defeat. The casualties have been big. Over 14,000 infantrymen, such as 3,397 killed or wounded and 10,000 captured. Moreover, 140 tanks and numerous vehicles and artillery portions had been destroyed. By means of comparison, German forces suffered handiest 2,800 casualties, a quite low range in comparison to their fighters, making it a decisive victory for the Wehrmacht. Interestingly, no longer most effective German soldiers celebrated the victory. However, also the neighborhood populace of St. V, predominantly of German origin, who hung swastika flags from their windows and balconies in aid. With the autumn of St. Vich, the city of Bastonia became now completely remoted, trapping within it the US-10 Honest Airborne Division. Bastonia might emerge as the very last impediment among the German forces and the Meuse River. Simply as George Patton's 1-3 Navy commenced its enhance towards the city, Baston will be the place wherein the fate of the Ardennes marketing campaign could in the end be determined. December 24th, and surprising sunny day surprises the Germans. On December 24th, and surprising sunny day took the Germans by using wonder. This variation in weather situations allowed Allied aviation to take off, attacking German deliver strains and destroying vehicles and tanks on nearby roads. On the identical time, US C-47 Dakota planes completed more than 3,000 flights to drop substances and ammunition to the 101st Airborne Division forces trapped in the town. Thanks to these resources, the Yank soldiers had been capable of have fun Christmas Eve, sharing meals rations and taking part in small Christmas items that had been air-dropped to them. December 25th, Christmas Day, beneath fire. On December 25th, Christmas Day, the German 5th Panzer Navy resumed its assault on Bastonia, ignoring the deliberate improve toward the Meuse River. But the German squaddies had been soon stuck off defend by means of the fierce fire from American artillery and bazookas, which set the upcoming panzer tanks ablaze. In the meantime, German infantry forces have been also seriously attacked with the aid of American gadget weapons. Even though German troops controlled to penetrate some streets of Bastonia, the American resistance repelled them, destroying numerous German tanks. In retaliation for the cussed defense at some point of the night, the Luftwaffe executed an extreme bombing over the metropolis, causing numerous casualties among both squaddies and the civilian population. Combating continues across the Ardennes. At the same time as the Battle of Bastonia persisted, other fronts in the Ardennes also saw excessive combating. The German 6th Panzer Navy endured advancing through the forests, managing to take Larache. At the same time on December 26th, the 2nd 1 Panzer Division captured the towns of Rashford and Celle located close to the Meuse River simply earlier than the German tanks ran out of gasoline. The furthest position reached by using German forces turned into Foy-Notre-Dame, marking an advance of 100 km into the indoors of Belgium, which turned into now not surpassed. Regardless of this German development, the troops of the United States 1st Navy placed up fierce resistance, managing to halt the Wehrmach's boost in locations like Freight, Manhy, H. Houghton, Marsh, Grand Manel, Ulysses, Dole, and the outskirts of Dinant. Due to this tenacious protection, the Americans destroyed 86 German tanks, 83 cannons, and 280 vehicles. Meanwhile, Piper's column, advancing independently, had no higher luck. His forces were surrounded in Leglys after struggling heavy losses. But way to his tactical foxy, Piper managed to open an opening inside the enemy traces and allowed his forces to break out, returning to German territory. Regardless of this escape, the losses were devastating. 36 tanks such as 15 Panthers, 8 Stugs, 7 King Tigers, and 6 Panzer IVs, 70 Hanomag half-tracks, 12 SDKFZ armored motors, 5 20-man aircraft weapons, 1 Flak 88 gun, 6 120 mortars, and 888 casualties, consisting of useless, wounded, and prisoners. Patton's 1-3 armored army breaks through to Bastonia. Patton's 0.33 armored navy advanced swiftly closer to Bastonia, smashing through the entirety in its path, consisting of German troops and armored automobiles. However, its progress turned into slowed by using barricades and boundaries located by German engineers who felled timber and created other blockades in an attempt to delay the development. Additionally, ambushes through German paratroopers, inclusive of the one at the Chamont looking in, cost the individuals 11 destroyed Sherman tanks and 65 dead infantrymen. Despite these problems, Patton's advance had a positive moral impact at the besieged forces, as by using midday on December 23rd, a few units of the 101st Airborne Division emerged from their shelters upon getting to know that Patton's forces have been drawing close. At the same time as the paratroopers held off the German assault, Patton's forces flanked the encirclement from the south, beginning Hearth with their tanks and forcing the Germans to retreat. Although Patton's troops in the end broke the siege at 1650 on December 31st, the warfare of Bastonia persevered inside the following days. Between December 27th and 30th, combating occurred around the city, such as a fierce armored struggle between 50 Panzer Thors and 350 American Shermans, which led to a German victory, though the numerical superiority of the people quickly became evident. The Wehrmacht, still resisting in a few areas, suffered heavy losses with 30 Shermans destroyed and ongoing attrition that decreased German armies to an unsustainable state of affairs. Allied aviation additionally played a key role, destroying a lot of the German columns in both Bastonia and other elements of the Ardennes, while Belgian and Luxembourgish resistance opponents contributed with powerful sabotage to halt German advances. Pissed off with the aid of the failure of the German offensive, Hitler from Berlin ordered a standard withdrawal to the Siegfried Line. On December 31st, the USA Navy regained complete manipulate of Bastonia and won 1-3 of the Ardennes. But the Germans still had a contingency plan prepared in case Operation Wacht Amren failed, called Operation Bodenplatte, which turned into to be finished in mystery. The Ardennes offensive and its accompanying operations fed Germany 80,000 guys and exhausted an enormous part of the USA's already low fuel reserves. Hitler refused to just accept that the War of the Ardennes had been a failure similar to the Kaiserlacht, Germany's last great offensive of worldwide warfare, and obsessively rejected any parallels with 1918, which to him symbolized best the revolutionary betrayal that overthrew the Kaiser and brought about a humiliating defeat for Germany. "We will never give up. We can also perish. However, the entire international will fall with us," he declared vehemently. Fashionable Guderian, horrified with the aid of the looming disaster at the Eastern Front, back to the Führer's headquarters 2 times more in close succession. During his visit on New 12 Months' Day, Guderian encountered the once-a-year procession of regime dignitaries and preferred staff chiefs coming to supply their non-public New Year's needs to the Führer. That same morning, Operation North Wind, the main supporting motion of the Ardennes offensive, have been released in Alsace. The day turned out to be catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. In a typically irresponsible flow, Göring deployed nearly 1,000 aircraft to assault floor goals on the Western Front. This try to galvanize Hitler resulted in the total destruction of the Luftwaffe and granted the Allies whole air supremacy. That same day, German country radio broadcast Hitler's New 12 Months' deal with. In it, there was no point out of the preventing inside the West, an omission that highlights the failure of the offensive. And noticeably, there has been additionally no reference to the Wunderwaffe. At the start of the new war, the Führer addressed the German human beings from his headquarters. "German humans, National Socialists, my fellow residents. The events of the past 365 days have forced me to dedicate a high-quality portion of my time and effort, all my attention and power to the only assignment for which I've lived for such a lot of years, the conflict for the future of my humans. Operation Bodenplatte, the remaining aerial breath of the 1-3 Reich operation. Bodenplatte become in severe measure devised through Hitler in case the offensive inside the Ardennes failed. At the same time as German forces, each from the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, fortified positions inside the eastern part of the Ardennes in anticipation of a future counteroffensive. The Luftwaffe was tasked with executing a decisive aerial attack. The main objective of this operation became to annihilate the Allied air forces within the area masking Belgium, the Netherlands, and northern France, after which awareness efforts on putting off enemy floor forces. To perform the operation, numerous airfields have been set up in Germany from which Luftwaffe aircraft could take off. The goal was to deal a lethal blow to Allied aviation within the centered regions, neutralizing their potential to respond and exposing their ground positions. For their element, the Allies also had strategic airfields in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, which were to be attacked to prevent their moves. The operation, whose purpose changed into to modify the course of the battle, have become a determined try and shift the route of the air and floor conflict in Europe. At the nighttime of December 31, 1944, Luftwaffe pilots obtained strict orders beforehand of Operation Bodenplatte. They had been instructed to avoid New Year's Eve celebrations, abstain from consuming alcohol, and go to bed early to be prepared for the undertaking tomorrow. The following morning, January 1, 1945, the so-known as Hermann Order was issued, named after the ancient Germanic victory inside the Tutterberg woodland in 9 Advert. This order marked the beginning of a huge aerial attack. At dawn, extra than 900 Luftwaffe aircraft took off from Germany and headed toward France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, with the task of destroying Allied air forces within the region. In Helmand, due to a navigational blunders, the Germans attacked an empty airfield and misplaced 27 planes. In Eindhoven, they destroyed 110 Allied planes, dropping most effective 15 in their very own. At Gilza and Rien, German jets together with the Arado R-234 and the Messerschmitt 262 launched attacks without causing significant damage. The operation resulted in a tactical victory for the Germans, even though the Luftwaffe also suffered massive losses inside the process. Operation Boden-Platter turned into a tactical victory for Germany, however an excessive strategic defeat. In spite of inflicting heavy losses on the Allies, destroying 2 times as many planes as the Germans lost, the Luftwaffe became not able to replace its own losses due to a loss of aircraft and trained pilots. Despite the fact that the operation induced a temporary lower in the wide variety of Allied flights, the Allies' commercial ability allowed them to quickly regain air superiority by means of mid-January 1945. For the duration of the assault, in evaluation, Germany misplaced 275 planes and 69 were broken, making the operation, despite the fact that a success inside the brief time period, have no lasting strategic impact. After the conclusion of Operation Boden-Platte, German forces tried to maintain out within the Ardennes, carrying out minor skirmishes without reaching extensive progress. At the same time, U.S. forces targeted on dismantling the V-1 and V-2 missile launching ramps which were firing on cities like London, Liège, and Antwerp. The arrival of the British SDI-X Corps proved decisive in tipping the balance in favor of the Allies, consolidating their benefit inside the location. As January 1945 advanced, the war have become called the Struggle of the Bulge, in which the United States Navy maintained the initiative and started out pushing the Germans back toward their own border. German forces suffered heavy casualties and had been compelled to withdraw units inclusive of the 6th SS Panzer Military, which become sent to the Jap the front to stand the Soviet offensive in Hungary. In spite of growing strain, the German army continued to offer resistance. For instance, on January 2nd, 2 King Tiger tanks destroyed 22 American Sherman tanks between Arland Court and Magyar. The following day, January 3rd, the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler-Jugend destroyed 48 Sherman tanks on the street to Bastonia. However, on January 4th, Patton's Third Navy suffered one among its greatest setbacks when 20 German tanks destroyed 16 Shermans and triggered 475 casualties, which includes lifeless and captured. Bizarre represented the remaining sizable triumph for German forces inside the War of the Ardennes, whilst the 26th and 340th Volksgrenadier Divisions managed to take the village and push U.S. troops extra than 2 km from their positions. But this victory was brief-lived as the American counteroffensive began fast that same day, allowing for the liberation of Barak Defer and Samar. From that factor on, Allied forces advanced unexpectedly, recapturing Braz and breaking through German strains on the Yondanville bypass on January 15th. Huels fell at the 17th. The Saar River turned into Crossed at the 18th, and Born and Huningen were occupied on the 20th. The recapture of Sandvit and Tuiv befell on the 23rd, followed through the incursion into Hinrichide at the 24th, and the access into Valerod and Weiswampak at the 25th before the capture of Prune on the 27th. Considering Axis forces found out that getting better from the defeat inside the Ardennes changed into almost impossible, and going through the danger of being trapped before attaining the Rye River, the OKW, German Excessive Command, with Adolf Hitler's authorization, ordered a general withdrawal to the preliminary positions of the offensive launched on December 16, 1944. As a result, maximum German forces and the Waffen-SS pulled lower back to the 1944 borders, saving a good deal in their manpower within the manor. On January 28, 1945, the German military absolutely deserted Belgium and Luxembourg, marking the stop of the conflict of the Ardennes.